Welcome to Volume 4 of the Woodsmaster, where we teach you to be the Woodsmaster. These drawings were done over 1,000 years ago by an Indian tribe named the Paiute. The Paiute Indians used to trade with another tribe, the Tubatalabal High Plains Shoshone, who lived in the High Sierra, for a material that's found locally. It's a substance called obsidian. Now, obsidian is something like volcanic glass, and it was used by the Indians to make things like arrowheads, knives, and any other kind of a cutting implement that they might need. But in order to accomplish this trade, the Tubatalabal Indians had to travel from those High Sierra mountains down across the eastern side of the Sierra, through the desert to this one rock, and then back again to rejoin their families somewhere in those mountains. How did they do it? Well, that's really the intention of this video. We're going to show you a little bit about wilderness travel, a lot about primitive navigation, and a whole lot of other neat little skills. So let's get started. This piece of rock here is a hunk of that obsidian. And you can see on this side here it looks like just a piece of rock. But when you flip it over, you can see what it really is. It's this shiny black glass-like material, and this is that obsidian. Now you may also notice that there's some pieces missing from in here, and it was those pieces that were used for arrowheads, knives, and other stone tools. Well, let me show you what you do with the pieces that are missing from this rock. Whenever you're working with the lithic arts, particularly a material like obsidian, be sure that you're wearing safety glasses. This is critical. The pieces of stone that fly off of here are coming off at a high velocity, and they're sharper than any knife blade will ever be. Another thing, when you work with lithic arts, be sure you got a good supply of band-aids, because you will cut yourself. So let me show you a little bit about this stuff. Hi, Karen. There's two techniques that I want to describe when we start working with stone here. The first of them is percussion flaking, and the second is pressure flaking. But before we even begin with this, I want to tell you a couple of things. One, we're going to be discussing these techniques in detail in a later volume of the Woodsmaster series. And two, there's people who spend their entire lifetimes working with the lithic arts, with stone tools and all the other things related to them. There's probably hundreds or maybe even thousands of ways to work with stone, and I'm just going to show you two of them. And as I said, they're percussion flaking and pressure flaking. So let's get started. Percussion flaking is nothing more than taking some sort of a hammer, in this case just a part of an antler, and whacking it against the stone that you want to work. This way you can break the stone off into the rough shape of something that you feel that you're going to use as a tool. Or you may be driving smaller flakes off, like this little piece here. That little piece there can be turned into something like an arrowhead, but you wouldn't use percussion flaking on that. In that instance, you'd use pressure flaking, where you use, again, I'm using as a tool a piece of an antler, and you'll press or use pressure to break small pieces off to shape the stone into its final usable cutting tool shape. Let me show you a little bit more about how this is done. These are the basic pieces you're going to need to get together to put together your lithic arts kit. One of the parts, the most important part, is this piece of leather here. This protects your hand from the cuts that you will receive if you don't have that piece of leather. It sits on your hand something like this. The thumb goes through, the leather sits on your palm, and you can double it over like this, or you can use it to grip something in that manner there. I'm just going to fold it up underneath to give me an extra thick pattern. Now, this is a piece of the obsidian that we're going to work with. I'll just stick that under my thumb here, and you can see how this thing is supported the full length of the obsidian. The tool that we'll use is just a little spike here from a deer, and the principle of pressure flaking is really very simple. All we're going to do is press straight down on the material that we're trying to shape. In this case, again, remember it's obsidian. It can also be just a piece of glass, like a bottle glass or something like that you find on the trail. But I'm just going to press straight down, and while I'm doing it, twist it a little bit, and that'll break off some pieces along the way. Let me show you what I mean. There we go. Now, I've broken some pieces off there. Let me just show you the other side. And you can see they all came off on the back side right here. And that's the basic idea in pressure flaking. You'll just be working the piece of stone back and forth on every edge you want until it begins to resemble the tool as you're trying to construct. See there, that's not a beautiful thing, but it's a functional arrowhead. This took maybe 3 minutes to fashion using pressure flaking. Piece of leather, a little spike of horn, and a chunk of obsidian. That's all there is to it. An interesting technique for telling directions involves the crescent moon. If you take the tips of the points on the crescent moon, connect them in a straight line, and follow that line to the nearest horizon, that's roughly south. I say roughly south. Connect these two lines to the nearest horizon, which means in our case, south is just about over there. Gives me an idea which direction I'm facing. Okay. Hi, Gay. How you doing, boy? Which way? Yeah. Where you go? Yeah, there you are. Dogs are pretty stable. They've got 4 legs. They can go just about anywhere they want. See, they're balanced front to back and side to side. But people, we're not quite so lucky. We only have 2 legs, and that makes us like this. This is exactly why we have the walking stick and why I carry one. This walking stick changes me from a pretty unstable biped to a very stable triped. I can go just about anywhere on one of these, even on this broken ground here. See, it supports me. It helps me to distribute the energy of walking to a 3rd leg. And if I was to trip just a little bit to one side, it'll catch me there, or it'll catch me here, it'll catch me forward or back. And another thing this will do, it'll help me to push brush side to side and make it easier for me to pass through tight brush or stop an occasional rattlesnake. The thing is, a walking stick is an almost indispensable part of the woodsmaster's arsenal of tools. So get yourself one, and make sure that when you pick one with a grain that runs straight down the full length of the stick itself. Never use anything like a broomstick. They'll snap, and if you were to fall on it, boop, they go right into your chest and kill you. Bummer. Well, anyway, let's get started with some of these walking techniques. The first thing I'd like to show you is something called the plainsman stride. But before I start with that, I want to explain something. We're in what's sometimes used as a Navy bombing range. So if a jet flies by every once in a while, that's the reason. We think we're out of the impact area, and if we're not, well, this will be the last survival lesson we get. In the meantime, let's take a look at the plainsman stride. The plainsman stride is a technique for walking that reduces the amount of energy that you use by, well, a large percentage. I can't give you an exact number, but let me show you how this thing works. Normally when we walk, our legs are kept slightly bent. Now this is exaggerated, but they're slightly bent. That's so we can move our weight from side to side. But you'll notice that the muscles up here, the quadriceps, are busy. They're working. When you're walking, a lot of the time, if your leg is slightly bent, that muscle is going to be working. Takes up a lot of energy to work this big puppy here. So what we want to do is somehow take that out of the link. You can't do it and still walk, but you can rest it. And here's the stride. All you're doing is every time you take a step, you let your knee go backward so that the weight is resting just on the skeleton. It's resting on the hip, it's resting on the knee, and on the foot. And the muscles aren't really involved, so the leg is actually resting. Something like a bird might do. When you take another step, you put your foot out, and you rest on the skeleton, and you relax. Each one of these steps then becomes a rest step, something like this. Now the weight on my body is shifting just a little bit too. From the front, this is going to look a little bit strange. I want you all to understand that I'm a regular kind of guy here, but let me show you what it looks like in an exaggerated way. When you rest it, your hip goes out to the side a little bit like so. You take another step, and it goes out to the other side. You get the gist here. It goes out like this. Each one of those steps is a little bit of a rest. That's a little bit also like you might have seen old John Wayne walk. He had that kind of a slink that he used. That's the plainsman stride. You've also seen it on long distance and high speed walkers during the Olympics. In real life, what it looks like coming towards you is like this. Ah, let me back up a little bit here. You see, when you walk like that, you walk very fast, and every step is a rest step. Again, we take a step, we relax, we take a step, we relax, we take a step, we relax, and so forth. If you keep doing that and you practice with it, pretty soon it'll become very, very natural for you to move through the wilderness using this technique. It's so easy to walk with a lockstep that pretty soon it seems like you're just resting and gliding through the wilderness. One little word of caution. When you're taking a step with this, don't snap the knee back like so. Just let it ride up onto the top of the knuckle for a moment. Remember, we're not actually stopping each time. Well, that's the essence of the lockstep, or the plainsman stride. They're both about the same. What you need to do is take this thing out into the street, or out into the woods, better yet, and practice it. And pretty soon you're going to find out just how quickly you can walk. I've heard people say that, oh, we walk at 5 miles an hour. Most of the people you run into, on the other hand, you'll find actually only walk maybe 2 or 3. That's because they're not really utilizing their body. The plainsman stride lets you do that. So let's get walking. Whew. Almost got there. Whew. Well, oh my God. Time for a little break here. You know, all the times I've been out with people, I've noticed a couple things about breaks. People hate to get started again, so they sort of become social affairs. If you're trying to be efficient, though, you're trying to travel efficiently in the wilderness, it comes down to some basic rules about taking those breaks. In general, when you take a break, the break ought to be 3 to 5 minutes in length, or 20 minutes or more. And there's a reason for that. If you've been walking for an hour or so and you're getting tuckered out, you're winded, you're hot, you need a drink of water, well, you should stop for maybe 3 minutes or so and drink that water and relax a little bit, and you'll find that you'll recover. But your body will still be warm. It'll still be able to get right up and plow back on up that trail. And you won't cool off so much that it's an agony to get started again, and you won't have to go through the inefficient process of warming up your body. On the other hand, if you need to stop for a little while and rub your feet or eat something or drink a lot of water and relax, then you should make your rest period at least 20 minutes in length. And the reason for that is, in 20 minutes, your body, if it's properly hydrated, can get rid of as much as 50% of the waste products that have built up as a result of all of the effort that you've been putting into your walking. So that's the basic rule. Rest breaks, 3 to 5 minutes, or 20 minutes or more. If you keep it at that, you'll be efficient. Well, that's enough of a break for me. I gotta get going. Oh, God. Oh, baby, yeah. Oh, yeah. You know, when you stop for those 20-minute breaks, one of the things you really ought to consider is taking care of these fellers here. Something a lot of people forget about when they go on a hike, but it's something you don't dare forget about. You see, your feet are going to be hitting the ground about 1,000 times every mile. Remember in volume 2 we talked about a mile. Mile is a Latin word, mille, meaning 1,000. Left foot hits the ground 1,000 times every mile. Right foot hits the ground 1,000 times every mile. Well, I weigh about 190 pounds. That means that every mile this foot is going to pull about 190,000 pounds of weight in addition to the impact with the earth itself. If I put in a 20-mile day, why, my feet are going to absorb 3,800,000 pounds of energy, and that's a lot. All these little bones down in here doing that work, and you know what? They don't get a lot of love. So take some time out from your day and rub your feet, make them happy, and they'll take good care of you. Wash them too. Yeah. Anyway, there's another little trick you might consider. Something that I learned a long time ago in the Army. It's when you're wearing a pair of socks. I usually wear a pair of heavy socks like these, but I also put on some light inner socks called knee highs. I use these ladies kinds of socks. I'm sorry, that's the wrong ones. These here, they're knee highs. They're like a stocking that you could buy. I don't know what these things sell for, 50 cents or $1 a pair. They're real thin. The reason for wearing these is this. You slip them up over the top of your foot here. That'd be the first sock that goes on, something like this. Looks strange, don't worry about it. No one's going to see them. And then you put on your heavy outer sock. The reason for that is this. With those two pairs of socks, when I walk, there's going to be friction. But the two pair of socks are going to be the things that absorb that friction. So the friction's taking place between the really thin inner pair of socks that sticks to your skin, that's the stocking, and the thick outer pair that absorbs the shock and the moisture and so forth. That's the best way to take care of your feet. Inexpensive, light in weight, and useful. Now, I mentioned these. This is a kind of a step up in the stocking thing. These are actually regular old, whatever you call them. A little embarrassing for me to buy, but just the same, they're very effective. You see, these make nice long johns. They're light in weight, they're small, they're reasonably durable, but you can put something like that in your pocket. If you wear those underneath your regular pants, they'll really tend to keep you quite a bit warmer. Not a lot of bulk, small in size, fairly warm and comfortable, and a built-in inner sock. And if you don't like them for that, you can put a rock in the tip and use them as a bolo. Well, I better get going. Got a ways to go, and then we're going to set up a little shelter out here in the desert and relax for the night. And then tomorrow we'll make our way up into the mountains. Hi, Coomer. Well, I'm not going to get out of here today, out of the desert, so I'm going to make this into my little shelter. It's a little natural cave formed by the lava. It's already pretty warm because it's been absorbing this heat throughout the daytime. You see it's dark in color and it radiates that heat. You've already seen in volume 2 how I make a fire bed. That's where you heat a section of earth with a fire for a couple of hours and cover it up with dirt and lay on top of it, and it keeps you nice and warm. Well, this is very similar to that, except it doesn't require nearly as much work or wood. What I'm going to do is build a small fire right in here. I'm going to do some cooking on it, and I'm going to use it for heat in the early evening. And then finally, when it's time to go to bed, I'll just pull the dirt back over the top of it, cross my legs over it, cover up with a blanket, and go to sleep. Now, to be sure, I'm going to be sitting up all night, sleeping sitting up, but it's better than being wide awake all night and cold. This will be pretty much the way I'll spend the night. This thing is sometimes called the head hole because the hole is about the size of your head. I've heard it called a butthole because it's about the size of your fanny as well. But the name is up to you. The principle is the same. Small hole, small fire, burn it for a while, cover it with dirt, cover yourself up with some kind of fabric, and go to sleep. Well, I better get back to work here. Not a lot of time left. Good morning. It's a windy night last night. It's kind of chilly, but the head hole down here worked pretty well. I built that fire and let it burn for about 2 hours, and then the heat from the dirt that I put over the top of that fire just kept coming up all night long and kept me pretty warm in this little spot. It was a bit uncomfortable, but all that was offset by the beauty of the night. The comet, the spectacle of the stars, the shooting stars, all of that stuff made it worthwhile. And I think that's probably one of the reasons people put themselves through this kind of thing. Anyway, we've got a long ways to travel today. We've got to walk across the rest of the desert now, and then we're going to head up a little canyon, get some more water, and then move on up into the high mountains where we're going to work on our navigation skills. But all of this is part of pathfinding, finding your way through the wilderness. That was a long, hot hike across the desert, but I knew this water was here. Just the same, dehydration is something that we need to talk about because it's a critical issue in wilderness travel. And the whole conversation, the whole discussion starts with this tin can right here. Well, the next subject is really important. It's dehydration. Now, we all know that we've got to drink a certain amount of water every day in order to remain hydrated. At least we think we know that. We also know that if you become dehydrated, you lose efficiency. And if you become dehydrated enough, you lose so much efficiency that you die. And that's really inefficient. At any rate, when we go up into the mountains, oftentimes we'll find people losing efficiency on the trail. And I'll ask them, have you been drinking water today? And they say, oh yeah, lots. Well, how much is that? Well, I don't know, they'll say. And then I ask them a really delicate question. And I know this, well, I'll just say it. I have to ask them, how much did you pee today? They look at me with a shock and they say, well, I don't know, I didn't check that. Well, let me tell you something. The best way to know if you're fully hydrated is to know how much you've urinated every day. You see, as human beings, we've got what we call an obligatory urinary output. In other words, we have to urinate approximately a quart per day. So if you knew that you had eliminated a quart, you know that you're fully hydrated. The problem's somewhere else. On the other hand, if you knew you'd only eliminated a little bit, well, you need to drink more water. This container holds approximately 1 quart of water. This is approximately what you need to eliminate on an average day. Now, how are you going to know that? Well, there's a little trick. Again, it's going to require a kind of an experiment. When you feel the urge to surge, this is at home, of course, take some sort of a container with you, something like a measuring cup. And while you're performing your ablution, count 1001, 1002, 1003, and so forth. From that count and the amount that you're eliminating, you'll be able to calculate the number of counts you're going to need to perform each day in order to get rid of a quart of urine. And that's all you need. Now when you get to the wilderness and you feel the urge, start counting. 1001, 1002, 1003. It stops. Nowhere near enough. So you know you need to drink enough water to make sure that your count comes up to the amount that you need to eliminate on an average day. That's all there is to it. Kind of an experiment, kind of delicate, but just the same, it'll make the difference between life and death in some circumstances. Here's to water. But we got to get up there. I got to get out of this heat for a while and feel that cool air blowing down off of the mountains. See ya. Well, That was a good little hike. Took quite a few stops between down there where we last talked and up here. And it occurred to me while I was coming up here that there's something I hadn't told you about. It occurred to me when my heart started to bump like that. And that's something called pulse rating. Now, pulse rating is a way of knowing when to take those breaks we were talking about earlier. You see, if you just keep on trucking and your heart rate starts to climb, you can wear yourself out in a hurry, especially if you let it climb up to 150 or 160 beats a minute. Pulse rating is a technique where you simply pay attention to the way your heart is beating and take your breaks based on how fast it's going. Now, if your heart's going about 120 beats a minute, that's okay. That's about 2 beats per second. But if it climbs much over that, it's going to start turning into a conditioning hike, and maybe the kind of conditioning hike that could end up killing you, especially if it uses up all of your energy. In a survival situation, remember, the energy that you save is the energy that can save your life. Well, how do you do the pulse rating? It's pretty simple. One way is to check the pulse right down here at your wrist. This is a good one. Count the pulse for about 6 seconds, and then add a 0 to whatever you come up with. In other words, if I came up with 12 beats in 6 seconds and added a 0, that's 120 beats a second. You can also do it, 120 a minute. Whew. You can also do it up here on your neck if you'd like to. I tend not to tell people to check up here on their neck. The reason is some people can actually pass out if they're checking their pulse there, which is counterproductive. The main idea is here, pay attention to your own body. Pay attention to your heart rate. Pay attention to your pulse rate. And you'll find out pretty soon that there's a certain rhythm that your heart needs to have for you to feel comfortable when you're hiking. Boom, 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 boom is about the rhythm that I'm looking for. If it goes much faster than that, I take that break. Now, something else about the break, something I didn't mention. I just came up from that direction over there. Now, if I hadn't stopped to look back every once in a while, that place behind me wouldn't look at all familiar. The only thing that would look familiar is what I see in that direction there. That's a real key part of staying found. When you're hiking, stop every few seconds, turn around, look behind you, and make sure that you recognize the land behind you. Especially when you take your breaks. Turn around and look that way while you're relaxing or rubbing your feet or doing any of the other things. Well, enough talk. Down here a little ways is a stream, and I'm going to go down there and relax, set up a little camp, and get to work on my Automani sun compass. But first I got to beat my way through some brush over here. Whew. I got for walking sticks. You know, the Vietnamese Montagnard tribesmen live up in the high mountains there. Have a technique called a bucat, walking stick technique. It's really pretty simple. Just 3 motions. It's they're D, do, and concho. D means go or push. D, do, like that, is also push. And concho means bull or water buffalo. So when they're walking along in a brushy area, they go D, do, concho, like that. Kind of fun. But it kind of gives a rhythm to your walking. D, do, concho, D, do, that kind of thing. It's weird, but hey, there's nothing else to do up here. We need to go over the top of that mountain over there. But before we do, it would be kind of handy to know just about how high it is. In order to do that, here's kind of a cool little trick. It's called the Del Hood teleheight technique. This is something my dad taught me. Now, this is one of those things that's easier to do than it is to explain, so bear with me and try it out because it really does work. It starts with a stick like this, and this stick is the same length as my arm. I can tell that because look, I can hold it like this and I can touch my eye, or almost my eye. Be careful you don't poke your eye out with this thing. And here's how you work it. You hold it out so it's level, you rotate the stick until it's approximately vertical, and then you look at the top of the mountain. If you look up at the top of the mountain and the top of the mountain is level with the end of the stick and your thumb is at the bottom of the mountain, then the distance from where you're standing to the base of the mountain is the same as the base of the mountain to the top of the mountain. Whew. This trick works with trees and all kinds of other things as well. But basically all you're doing is a little bit of kind of trigonometry with a piece of wood. Give it a try. Pretty soon you'll figure it out. Neat trick. When you're traveling through areas like this where there's a dense forest, sometimes you're going to need to use something other than landform features to navigate. Now in a place like this, we don't have any kind of hillsides we could look at, but we do have something called a predominant object which we can work for. Now the predominant object technique is something that was put together by Dr. Andre Bourbeau at the University of Quebec in Canada. Andre decided that one of the easiest ways to navigate in a dense forest was to identify something like that tree back there as a predominant object. And what we'll do is we'll travel to that tree, and when we get there, we're going to make some sort of an indication, a natural indication of the direction we're traveling in. Then we're going to identify a new predominant object, travel to that, make another identifying feature, travel to the next one, and so forth. And when we return, we just follow this little trail of indicators back to where we started. It's a pretty simple technique. And remember, each time you place an indicator, it's within sight of the previous one that you set. So let's go over there and I'll show you what an indicator would look like. Here I am at the predominant object, that tree I was talking about. For a pointer, for an indicator, I'm going to use this dead branch right here. I'll just lean it up against the tree, the direction that I plan to travel, and so it points at my next predominant object. And just to be sure that it looks a little bit unusual, I'm going to take a couple little branches here, this one here, and place it at the base and maybe put a couple of pine cones on it. So this looks unusual to me. Someone else passing by in this area isn't necessarily going to notice that. And in fact, when I come back this way, I'll just break it and my indicator is gone. In the meantime, this will serve nicely to get me back to my camp. So I'll just move on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. I lived in Turkey with the Kurds for about a year. While I was there, I learned a lot of interesting little techniques. One of the things they showed me was something that, well, it dates way back to the time of the Ottoman Empire. And what it was called was the Ottomani sun compass. It's basically just a couple of pieces of wood, a few pieces of string, and gosh, that's it. It tells you directions. Well, we've been talking about it. I said I'd show it to you, so the time is here. This is the Ottomani pocket sun compass. It's just two pieces of wood and some string. Pretty simple little gadget. But before I show you how this thing goes together, I want to give you another word. The word is lee. Northerly, southerly, easterly, westerly. You see, most of the primitive direction finding techniques, with the exception of celestial, give you directions kind of in the direction you want to go, in a northerly direction or a southerly direction. None of these things are going to give you things that are going to be within 1 or 2 degrees. In fact, most of the ones that are based on the sun sometimes can cause you to walk in a giant circle. And this is true particularly up on the North Pole or down on the South Pole. But let me show you how this one works. It's made of 2 pieces of wood, as I said, and some string. Now the string comes from the mini kit or the survival kit that you saw in volume 3. This is the stuff out of the parachute cord. And the wood can be any wood you find in the wilderness. And all I've done is I've made a little indicator post here that plugs into the flat board, and it hangs from the string. And the way you use it is this. I simply rotate the flat board until the shadow from the indicator post touches the east-west line here, like so. And that's east-west. This is a north-south line right through there. Each one of these lines that you see drawn on the outside was put on there during a different trip to the wilderness. One of the things that we all know is that the length of the day changes through the year. During the summer it's going to be very, very long and the sun is higher in the sky. That means that the first line here will be closer to the vertical post. However, later on in the year, towards the winter, that post will be casting a very, very long shadow even at midday. So this one here would be made sometime out in the winter. The main point here is that this thing should be reset several times if you're going to be out for a month or 2 or 3. Once we've got it set up though, it'll give you a northerly or a southerly direction pretty easily in just a few moments. Pull it out of your pocket, hold it by the string, rotate it until the shadow touches, and you're on your way. Now let me show you how you make one of these. First you need to find a piece of wood about as wide as your fist. That's about 4 knuckles. And then with your handy dandy Swiss Army knife, start sawing. Now that I have my piece of wood sawed off at about the length we want, I'm going to need to cut a little board out of the center of this. For a little bit of safety, I've left a branch on the side of the hunk. So if I decide that I want to use my knife here and whack like so, my hand is on the opposite side from the side I'm cutting on. But this is really the hard way to do it. Let me show you a trick that kind of speeds up splitting a hunk of wood out of a block like this. And all it requires is that you have your knife located where you want it to be, something like that, and another piece of wood. In this case, I've taken a piece of fresh willow, and this is going to be like a little hammer. Now, what I could use other things, you know, I could use a rock, but that would ruin my blade. Let me just show you what I'm going to do. So easy that is. I've gone and split a nice flat piece off of here. All I need to do now is trim that up a little bit. And I've got a nice flat front face for my compass. I'm going to do the same thing back here now and make a piece of wood. Okay, now I've got a piece of wood here, and I'm going to make the pointer. If you remember from volume 1, you put your thumb over the piece of wood you want to cut, you turn the wood in towards your hand, the blade slices right in, gives you a nice clean cut. This should be about 2.5 inches in length. Diameter you can adjust with the other side of the blade. So I'll just go ahead and get this prepared. The next step is going to be to use the awl on your Swiss Army knife to drill a little hole. It's going to be in about 1/2 inch or so from the edge and about the center of the piece of wood. Try to be sure that when you drill the hole, you drill in so that the post will go in vertical to the board. You can see that the drill is going in straight like that. Now that my hole's been drilled all the way through, I've got my vertical post roughed out. So I'll just push that down into the hole like so until it bottoms out at the bottom like so. And we've got the basics of the sun compass ready to go. Anytime you want to take it out, you can just rotate it, grunt a little bit, and it comes right out. I make the vertical post about 2 knuckles long, measured just like this. You want to make the post sharp, like a little spike on one end. So I'll kind of carefully whittle this down into a point. That point makes it more accurate. It's a little easier to see where the shadow terminates if you've got a good sharp point to work with. So we'll bring her down here a little bit, like so. Now we have the basic compass. We've got the pointer in place, and we've got the board itself. And it would actually work. The problem with these at this point is if you're to make that horizontal line, which I'll show you in a little bit, what's going to happen is if you have the angle of this thing changed in any way when you're taking a reading, it'll change the position of the shadow with respect to the line that you draw. So it needs to stay at the same level each time you take a reading. You could accomplish that in a number of different ways. If you've got a perfectly flat piece of wood, you could actually float it on the surface of a real calm pond or in a glass of water. Or if you're in a big wide open desert and the sand is very flat, you could lay it on that. Or you could do, as I was showing you earlier, suspend it from a series of lines so that it always returns to the same level. In the original model I showed you, I was suspending the compass from 4 different points, cords drawn in from each of the corners. In the new one, we're just going to use 3 points, one here in the center and one on each corner there. it really doesn't make any difference how many lines you suspend it by, just so long as it always returns to the same level you started with when you made the reading. I'm going to prepare this for the suspension lines by sawing the corners off of the compass itself. Once I've got these off, I'll be able to cut nice clean suspension lines for it. Ouch. Now that both of the corners are cut off back here, I'm going to remove the vertical post, and I'm going to cut my first notch right in the center in front of where the post is going to go. This will be the first of the suspension lines. It doesn't need to go in very far. In fact, you could actually just drill a hole if you want to. I just use the slot so I can take the string off and use it for other things. The next of these little notches is going to go in the center of the flat corner here. The flattened corner. We'll just get it started like so. And I'll attempt to avoid cutting through my hand. This is generally considered to be bad form in a survival situation. But we like the pain. That's why we do this sort of thing. There we go. And now the last of them. All done. Now, this is not a precise piece of work. In fact, it doesn't need to be. All we're trying to do is to get a general lee direction. Northerly, remember? So I've got the 3 cuts. I've got the place for my post. And I'm all set to tie the lines together. This is some of the parachute cord you saw in volume 3 when we were putting together the survival kits. And as you remember, the parachute cord had some individual lines in the center. Well, I'm just going to withdraw 3 of these by stripping off the outer casing. So I've got 3 cords from which to suspend the compass. I'll take the tip of these 3 cords, tie a little knot in them, like so. Doesn't make any difference what kind of a knot you tie. And then turn the compass over. I'll take one of these cords and pass it through each of the slots that I cut in the wood. Here we go. If I get my fingers to work, everything will be great. There we go. And that's it. Now it's suspended. Now each time I should be able to hit that same kind of level with this. In order to be certain that the compass is going to be landing on the cord in the same way each time I assemble it, what I'll do is I'll take the knot and index it on the center cut. You can see it right here. As long as it's in that position, these cords will always remain to the return to the same position. So we'll turn it back over and suspend it, and it'll always return in the same place. I use the shadow stick method to make this east-west line right here, and going perpendicular to it is my north-south line. The way to set the Automati sun compass is once you set this up, place the sun compass at this junction here, so it goes east-west like so, north-south. In the northern hemisphere you want the vertical post to be to the south, as you can see it here. Now let's take a little closer look at how we go ahead and set the compass itself. As you can see, I've oriented it so the sides of the Automati sun compass are east and west, and you can see the little shadow cast by the post. In order to set the thing, all you do is at the tip of the shadow you draw an east-west line. This is crude, but you'll get the idea. Use a piece of charcoal if you've got it, a pen or a pencil, or even carve a line. And there's my east-west line. From now on, when I want to orient, what I'll do is I'll simply rotate the compass until the tip of the shadow touches the line and it's oriented again. And you can see what just happened. If I go like this, it pulls away from the line. If I rotate it back like this until it touches, it's oriented just the way the larger stick was oriented. So that's all there is to it. It's a pretty simple little technique. It's very, very functional and kind of fun to make. Yep. Well, folks, as technology changes, so do our tools. And this little tool here is something we came up with out there at Hood's Woods, and it's called the ATAX. And we've taken that Automati sun compass and we put it into this ATAX. Let me show you how we did it. In order to use your ATAX as a compass, you first need to establish true north and south. In order to do that, I'm just going to use a magnetic compass. Now you can use any technique you want. You can use a magnetic compass, or you could use one of the systems that we show you in Volume 4 of the Woodsmaster series. Now the magnetic compass, you can see here that the arrow is pointing a little bit to the east of true north. That's because this little compass here, all magnetic compasses point at the magnetic north pole. And here, that's just a little bit, as I say, to the east of true north. True north is that direction, and that's the direction that I've drawn this line here. This is a true north line. Now what I'm going to do is take the ATAX and place it on that true north line, something like so. At that point, what I want to do is make certain that the ATAX is level. So I'm just going to use this little stick here to bring it up so it's level. How do I know it's level? Well, we've built something in to help you to determine level. What we've done is we've added this little hole right here on the ATAX. This is not only a firebow bearing, but it's also a leveling hole. See, what we do is we put a little water in there, and with a few drops of water we can tell if the ATAX is roughly level. In fact, it's pretty close to level right now. As soon as you've determined level, then you can go back to the graphic. Now on the graphic here you can see that the shadow that's being cast by our little nail is on a line even with this third line up from the bottom. 1, 2, 3. And the tip of the shadow is right out in here. It's late in the afternoon right now, so it's a ways out there. But we know that it's going to be on this line. Anytime for the next several days that I want to find directions, all I need to do is to level the ATAX, use the same center post for a shadow, and orient that shadow until it touches the line. And then it will be oriented true north and south, something like that. Earlier today we did some time-lapse photography. That will show you just how evenly that little shadow follows along the third line. I'm going to start out by showing you two techniques for determining direction with a stick. First, I'm going to show you the shadowless stick method. What I'll do is I'll take this stick and point it at the sun so the shadow disappears. When it's set up that way, then I'll show you how you tell directions. So first we'll just point her at the sun like so. Takes a little pushing around, you know, got to shove that thing just right. Ah, there we go. Now you can see the shadow has pretty much disappeared. Now we have to wait. With the shadowless technique, what we did is pointed the stick directly at the sun. And then we waited for a little while, and you could see the shadow began to grow out of the base of the stick itself, and you can see it here. That makes an east-west line. Now how accurate is this? Well, this isn't quite as accurate as the shadow stick method for a number of different reasons, but I'll put the little compass down here and you get some sense of it. Remember now that the magnetic compass points a little bit to the east of north, but this is saying that north-south is about like this. With a correction for magnetic north, it'll be about like this. And the shadowless technique says that north is like this. So it's pretty darn close, and it's a really easy way to do it. Press it in the ground, point it at the sun, wait a little while, and look at the shadow. And there's your east-west line. Quick and easy. In order to do the shadow stick method, all you need to do is to place a stick in the ground like I've done with my walking stick here, or find some other kind of a shadow, maybe one that's cast by a tree. And then you need something to mark the tip of the shadow. Now I've carved some little kind of stake looking things here that I'm going to use to identify the tip of the shadow at different points. You'll see this in just a moment. You can use anything you want, little rocks or other sticks. Makes no difference. But let's get started on this and I'll show you how it works. Okay, as you can see, there's no shadow on the shadowless stick. And what I'm going to do now is take my little stake and mark the tip of the shadow from the walking stick, just like that. Now we'll let it sit for a while and see what happens. There we go. Now let me show you what we did. This is the first stake I pressed into the ground. And then I pushed another one into the ground at the tip of the shadow every 10 minutes. And you can see that it made a straight line. Now to make that line a little clearer, I put this piece of wood out here. Now remember, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. That means the first shadow will be cast to the west and the last shadow will be cast to the east. So this is our east-west line. Where's north and south? Well, north and south is a line that is perpendicular to your east-west line. Let me just show you. I'll just place a little stick down here to kind of give you some sense of it. This is about 90 degrees that you see right here. How accurate is it? Well, let me show you. I'll put this little compass right there like that. And you can see, if you can see the compass, that it's pretty close. It's almost right on. Now, just so you know, a magnetic compass points a little bit to one side of true north in most places. It's a feature called magnetic declination. For where we are, our compasses are pointing about 16 degrees to the east of true north. So if you see a little difference between the way the compass is pointing and the way the stick is indicating, that's because of a magnetic error in the magnetic compass. But the shadow stick is pretty much right on. In order to get some sensation of time using the shadow stick method, you can take a stick as I have here, and I've pressed one end of it up against the vertical shaft that we use to cast a shadow. Now, if I move this off to one side, you can see that it pulls away from the east-west line. And then it comes closer to it again. When you have the shortest shadow cast by the vertical stick, as it is right here, that's noon. That's solar noon. And guess what? Something else happened. When you've got solar noon, you also have north. Your shadow will be pointing due north at solar noon. Well, by now you've noticed that this is a pretty green scene. Why is it green? Well, it's green because we've attached a night vision scope to our video camera. By doing that, we've picked up some capabilities that we ordinarily wouldn't have. And among those capabilities is the ability to videotape the stars. We're going to be videotaping a couple of constellations that are really important to direction finding. One of these is Cassiopeia, which looks like a big W in the sky and points in the direction of the North Star. Another one is the Big Dipper, which also points in the direction of the North Star. Once we've identified the North Star, also known as Polaris, we'll be able to do things like tell our latitude, work up a device that we can use to accurize our shadow stick method, and, well, just feel confident that we know which direction is which. But there's something else in the sky tonight that I want to point out. That something is a visitor. It's only going to be here for a little while. It's the Hale-Bopp comet. It's been thousands of years since it's been here, and it'll be thousands of years before we see it again. But we thought we ought to give you a look at that one as well. They're not much good for direction finding, but they're sure spectacular to take a look at. Now, part of what we're going to do tomorrow morning. I'm going to set up a device tonight, and then tomorrow I'm going to show you how it works. But I want to show you how to set it up in the darkness. After we've done that, you're going to probably have recognized the fact that, well, there's some limitations to the equipment that we've got. And among those limitations is one, well, pretty important one. You see, a night vision scope like the one we're using only has a very small field of view. This means that some of the stars will be outside of the scope when we're looking at them. In other words, we won't see the entire constellation. We can only see portions of it at a time. But what we're going to do to help you to kind of understand what parts of the constellation are visible is we're going to use a very bright light, and we're going to actually shine it on the stars that make up the constellation to help you to break those stars out from the starry background. Well, that's about it. I think we need to get started taking a look at those stars. Well, there's an interesting visitor to the night sky. That's the comet Hale-Bopp. Just happens to be in the sky tonight, just as it happened to be in the sky about 4,000 years ago. I ought to point out that, well, it's a pretty attractive celestial event. It really isn't very good for direction finding. But what is good is another constellation called Cassiopeia, which is right over here. These are the stars in the constellation Cassiopeia. You can see them right there. Makes like a big W. Now what happens is that W kind of points across the sky, well now, to the North Star. There it is again. It's not as good a pointer as the pointers in the Big Dipper, but hey, it kind of gets you in the right part of the sky. So keep that in mind. You've got two major constellations to work with. You've got the Big Dipper and you've got Cassiopeia. This is the tip of the handle in the Big Dipper. Let's take a look at that. You can see it kind of goes up like this through these bright stars all the way up to the cup. This is the cup here. Now the tip 2 stars right up there will be the ones that point across the sky at the North Star. That's it right there. That little cluster of stars you see up there is the 3 stars in the belt of Orion. Now the center star in the belt rises due east. So if you were to look out there in a winter evening and you saw that thing coming up, you could say, ah, that's east. Unfortunately, this is a winter constellation. Let me show you what I've done here. This big stick was a stick we used in the shadow stick method. Now I've taken a second stick and driven it into the ground. But before I did that, I made sure that the second stick, this little one here, was in a line with the big stick and with the North Star, which is just up there. Now what I've got is a straight line between the sides of the little stick, the big stick, and the North Star. This is a celestial north line, straight between these two. Now there's another part to this trick, and this is it. After having these lined up and this stick securely in place, I ran my thumb down the little stick while I looked across the top of my thumb. What I was looking at was the top of the big stick and the North Star. I just moved it down until I looked across the top of my thumb, the top of the big stick, and I could see the North Star. That means that all 3 of those points, the thumb, the top of the stick, and the North Star, are in a line. Once I'd done that, I carved a little mark in this smaller stick. Now I'm going to show you what to do with that mark tomorrow. This odd-looking apparatus here is a little something I put together last night. Now let me explain what you're looking at. This first big stick here is my walking stick, and I pushed this in the ground, and we used it with the shadow stick method to determine east and west. Last night I took a second stick and placed it in the ground a few feet away from the first stick. But before I did, I sighted along the side of the second stick to the walking stick at the North Star. So the line goes from this stick to this one to the North Star. The next thing I did is I moved my thumb down this little second stick here until I could sight across the top of my thumb, the top of the walking stick, straight at the North Star. In other words, this piece of string here, this line right here, points right at the North Star. In fact, it's still pointing at the North Star. You just can't see it because it's daylight. The second line down here is a level. Now, if I were to measure the angle between this one here pointing at the North Star and level right in there, that would be equal to our latitude. Very, very close. So if I measure this, I've got our latitude. That's one of the purposes of this. It's sort of like a primitive sextant. Another thing that this does is it allows us to accurize, or to check the accuracy of our shadow stick method. Now let me show you how this works. We've got the big stick here, this is the walking stick, connected by this piece of wood right here to the base of the other stick we used to sight on the North Star. In other words, this line here, described by this piece of wood, indicates celestial north. And you can see it comes into the shadow stick method, which indicates east and west, at a slight angle. Right alongside that piece of wood, I placed another one here. You can see it. This is actually the north and south that was identified by the shadow stick method. When you look at the two, you can see that there's a difference. Celestial north, which is very close to our actual geographic north, and solar north, the one that's determined by our shadow stick method, are different. Now, this difference would be greater at different latitudes. For instance, if we were to head up into Canada, you might see an error more like this. Farther north, the error may be more like this. And you can see right away that it wouldn't take long for the shadow stick method to become a pretty useless tool, unless you've got a technique like this to make sure that you can accurize it. And I want to point out too that seasons have an effect on this as well. It's a good idea to use this technique at least once each time you go into the wilderness to make sure that your shadow stick method is indicating a north that you can actually use. I'm standing on the north end of the north-south line that we determined using the celestial north technique. If I was standing on the north end of the one that, well, is indicated by the shadow stick method, and if I was in the Pacific Northwest, I'd be facing this direction here. See, there's quite a difference between facing over there and facing over here. And that's what this thing does, is it accurizes that. If I was up in Canada someplace, it was getting cold and I wanted to head south, straight south and get in those warmer climates, why, by golly, if I headed over here, I'd end up in Washington State somewhere. If I follow the celestial north-south line, I'd end up right where I want to be, sunny California.
Here's another handy-dandy use for those two sticks that indicate celestial north. Right now we know that the main stick down here is pointing true north. That's the angle directly towards where the Earth is rotating. It's also basically geographic north. Now what we want to know is what is our magnetic deviation. Remember, magnetic deviation is the amount of difference between true north and where your compass is pointing, and it varies all around the world. Well, in order to find that number, all we need to do is to match the side of the compass up and see what angle the magnetic needle is pointing at. In this case, it's pointing at roughly this angle here. That means that our magnetic deviation is equal to this angle right in there. If you measure that with your compass, you're going to know what your magnetic deviation is and be able to compensate on your maps with that. As you can see, I've lined up the side of the compass with the celestial north stick. You'll also notice that the little red arrow that indicates magnetic north is not in the blue circle. So I just rotate the compass until it is in the blue circle, and then read right off of here the number of degrees to the magnetic north.
Another technique for telling directions involves your watch. All you need to do is have a watch that tells the correct local time and a little stick. And here's how you do it. Place the stick, the tip of the stick, right over the junction of the hour hand and the minute hand. And then you rotate the watch until the shadow from that stick falls across the hour hand. You can see here, right there. That's the hour hand. As soon as it's oriented in that manner, halfway between the hour hand and 12 o'clock is north. So it looks something like this. So north is right up here where my finger is, and you can see that the compass points that direction, as does the little Automani sun compass. So these three techniques work pretty well. Now you know how to tell directions with a watch. But someday you'll be doing that and someone will come up to you and say, gosh, that's pretty neat, but how do you do it with one of these? And you say, well, you know, that's not too tough because I have one of these. Or you can even say, I have one of these too. But let me show you how we do that. You just draw the watch face, like so. I make it kind of easy this way. This is 12, 1, 2, and 3 o'clock. Something like this. Now, you do the same thing that you did with a regular old watch. You simply put a stick in the center and you rotate the watch until the shadow falls across the hour hand, which is about like this. And halfway between the hour hand and 12 o'clock is north, just like that. And you know what? Here's our compass, and look at that. They're right on.
Here's a handy-dandy little trick, and if you were ever in the military, you probably know what it is as soon as I show you. Ding! It's a piece of rubber. Now, what do I use this piece of rubber for? I use it for my shoes, my boots. Look at here. Open that up. Look, there's a piece right there. That's called a blousing rubber. Let me just put it back together again here. Get in there, you. There we go. What I do is I just tuck my pants under that piece of rubber, and it keeps them nice and tightly sealed to my boots. Now when I'm walking along, I don't get dust and bugs and twigs and all kinds of other strange objects up inside my pants. Also, on a cold day, it keeps the pumping, the movement of warm air from my body into the outside, it keeps that to a minimum. In other words, it doesn't have an easy escape here. But blousing rubbers do keep your legs a lot cleaner, and if you want clean lower legs, this is a good way to go. Beside that, they're useful. You see, when it's not on my boots, I can use it for, well, like an engine for a trap. I could use it for a lot of things, you know, big exercises, whatever. The uses are up to your imagination, but this is a handy thing, the blousing rubber.
With that little bit of obsidian that we found down there in the desert, I made up a few different tools. Remember, now these are just flakes, and none of them are fancy. They're just pieces of stone that have been kind of percussion flaked or pressure flaked into some kind of usable shape. What I'm using here is nothing more than a fragment that I kind of ground a little section out of with my bone tool, my little horn. So you can see that kind of conforms to the shape of what it is that I'm trying to scrape here. That gets the bark off this piece of willow. Another thing that I made was this little guy here. It's not pretty, it's just kind of like a little arrowhead. The idea is I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it, so I put this together in maybe 3 or 4 minutes. I don't care if it breaks or if it doesn't work real well, but it's good enough to do the job. If I wanted to hunt, this would do it. What I want to do is attach that to an arrow shaft, and that's what I've decided to use this piece of willow for. In order to do that, we need some sort of a slot to stick it in. Obviously, it's not going to just hang right there on the end, so you have to make some sort of a slot. What I want to do is show you a little trick that makes this slot making a lot easier. To make the slot with the for the arrowhead, what we're going to do is we'll start with a little awl on your Swiss Army knife, and we're going to find a spot a couple inches down from the tip of the arrow shaft and make just a shallow hole, not very deep, into the side. And then we'll go to the other side directly across from where we made the first hole, and we'll make another shallow hole. Remember, these don't have to go very deep. They're just going to be kind of like place markers here in a few minutes. After we've made those 2 holes, they're right in here, we'll close up that awl, and we'll get out the handy dandy blade. The next step that you're going to want to consider is you've got a hole here, a hole back here. Now we're going to make a kind of a slice in the side of the arrow shaft up about 1/2 inch or so from the 2 holes you made. This is towards the tip, as you can see. The hole is here, we're cutting on the side. Each of these cuts and holes is about 90 degrees from each other. So I've got one slice there, a hole here. I'm going to make another slice there, and there's a hole on the bottom. So we'll flip it over, locate it, something like this. Make a little slice in there like so. Now what we've got is this. We've got a hole right up in here, a slice here, and another hole on the other side. First thing you want to do now is you take the tip of the arrow shaft and you just bend the shaft just a little bit. You can see how that's cracking right there. Now I turn it over and I do the same thing on the other side. Just kind of gently bend it. If it doesn't actually snap open, that's okay. Just kind of work it a little bit like so. Go back to the other side and do it again. Back to the other side and do it again. And each time you turn it a little bit, you're going to feel something cracking in there. Then what you're going to do is bend it towards the holes. This way and this way. And look what happened. It popped right out and left behind a nice little slot to hold the arrow tip. Look at there. So it fits right in. It's easy to do. You can use a saw if you want to, but this is kind of the old way of doing it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to find a way to lash this thing in place to hold it so it's nice and solid. So what I want to do is take the tip out, and I'll clean this hole up just a little bit. This is slot up a tiny bit, and we'll go ahead with the next step. The tip of this thing is nice and clean now. I've simply tapered the ends of the stick so it'll slide in a little bit better. Here's the arrowhead. That, of course, would fit just like this. But we have to bind it in there somehow, so what I'm going to do is take a little bit of the inner cord that came from the parachute line, which we've used so many times before. This is one of those larger inner cores, and I'm going to make a little loop. just like this, and slide it into the slot where the arrowhead's going to go. So you can see a little loop there. On the other side, we've got the long cord and the short cord. Now I'll take the arrowhead itself and shove it down into the slot until it's securely placed in there. Next step is to take your cord and just wrap it around a few times. This piece I'm using is kind of short, but I wanted to kind of give you the idea of how it's done. Wrap it around a couple of times like so, and then poke it through the loop like this. Once it's through the loop, take the short end and tug on it. When you do, that's going to pull that knot right in underneath the arrowhead itself, like so. Now, just wrap that cord from both directions around the arrow shaft, like this. I'm not going to bother to do too many more turns on this because we're just trying to demonstrate it, right? Even as a demonstrator, this would be a deadly arrow. And one more part of my granny knot here. Whoa, come back here. Some people can't talk and tie knots at the same time. I'm one of them. But that's okay. In the wilderness, I don't talk. I just tie knots. There we go. Something like that. So now you can see we've gone and tied the arrowhead into the shaft. It's fairly secure right now. This would actually be a functional arrowhead. How long did this part of the arrow take? Well, we're talking 4 or 5 minutes for the tip itself. We're talking about another minute or so for the shaft, setting it up as you see it here, and maybe another couple of minutes to put the feathers on the back end. That's how long you can make a functional arrowhead in a survival situation. But I want to make this a little bit better. So let's go on to the next step. This pine tree here that's been mutilated by a porcupine is going to give us exactly what we need to finish our arrow. And that's this sap here. We're going to collect some of this, just break off these little pieces. And with this, we're going to make up some pitch. I'll show you the process for that in just a second. But we want to collect a good supply of it because pitch is a kind of a glue that we can use for a lot of different things. Pitch right in, as they say. There you go. There's a lot of good stuff on here. I don't much like porcupines except maybe as dinner. There we go. That'll do it. I think we got enough to get us started here. After you've collected the pine sap and tossed it in your handy dandy can, add some water to it and bring it down to your fire and let it boil for a while. You can see it's boiling with a little vigor here. After it's boiled for some time and you no longer smell the odor of pine coming up out of that can, that means that the aromatic essences that make that pine sap sticky have been boiled off. You now have pitch. But there's just one more step to go. You need to remove it from the fire, and when you do, you notice that the pine sap will float to the surface. Take a stick, poke it in there, and swirl it around a little bit, something like a sucker here. Get a little bit on the end of a stick, and set it aside to cool. While that one's cooling, pick up another one, swirl that around and get a thin layer of it on your stick, as you see here. Set that aside to cool, and so forth. And continue to do that with a number of different sticks. I usually use 4 or 5 sticks at a time because it gives them a chance to cool off. Keep on doing that until you've picked up most of the stuff that's floating on the surface. Usually when you do it this way, you're going to find that the big pieces, the stuff like the rocks or whatever might be stuck in it, will sink to the bottom, and just the good stuff will be at the surface. So that's it. After the stuff cools, you'll have a piece that looks like this. It's a nice and hard hunk of pitch, and it's not sticky. And this is going to be the glue that we're going to use to attach the arrowhead to the shaft. There's a lot of refined techniques for using the pitch on your pitch stick to attach these pieces together. I'm just going to use the simplest one. What I'll do is take one of those cooled off pitch sticks and heat it up a little bit until the material starts to become liquid again. And as soon as it's become liquid, I'll transfer a drop or two of that up onto my my arrow about like so. Now you want to cover both sides of the arrow. Remember, what we've got holding this material together is nothing but some nylon from your parachute cord, which means that it's semi-sensitive to heat. And if we expose it directly to the heat, it may melt. Now, once I've goobed this stuff on there, like you see, this is a real beautiful job I'm doing. I'll just get it on there like that. As I said, this was going to be the crude, easy way. There we go, that's plenty. I'll just take this and hold it near the fire. Excuse me. Now, while that fire heats it up, it's going to start to melt down into the cracks between the cords, down into the area between the arrow shaft and the arrow point, and bind the whole thing together. At least that's the plan. So we'll just try to do this. You don't want to heat it up too much, not directly over the fire. If you see a spot that got missed somehow, I add a drop to it. Like there's a place right there that didn't get a good gob of it. And we'll just heat it up. As I said, there's more refined techniques for doing what I'm doing. You can use a hot stone and actually iron the pitch into place. Or you could pre-apply the pitch, heat the stick, and then insert the arrow point, and that'll attach it even more firmly. But this is quick and dirty stuff I'm showing you here. Just want to get it made and get it out into the field. There we go. Yeah, it's getting there now. It's starting to soak in there and bind everything together. Now the extras are going to kind of drip off, as you can see they're doing. There we go, that's good enough. So I'll set that aside now to cool. But you can see what we've got. Well, that's about it for attaching the arrow point to the shaft itself. One way to test to make sure that the bind is good and tight is to grab the tip of the point and work it back and forth. And you can see when I do that, the shaft itself flexes and the tip is not at all loose. So this is good. This is functional. It'll work. It's not a thing of beauty, but it was quick and easy. So that might be one of the little things you can practice to get yourself some tools for the wilderness. Well, we hope you enjoyed this volume of the Woodsmaster. You've had a chance to take a look at some of the basic pathfinding and primitive navigation techniques. You've also seen a little bit about lithic arts, how to make an arrowhead or a drill, as you saw here. And we're going to be doing a lot more with both of those. You're going to see more pathfinding tips as we go along through the series, and we're going to devote an entire tape to the lithic arts. In the next volume of the Woodsmaster, we're going to be discussing traps. We're going to show you how to build them, and we're going to talk about the three basic types of traps: the crushing, the lifting, and the choking type traps. Until then, we hope you have a good time and practice these skills. Well, we hope you enjoyed this volume of the Woodsmaster, and we hope you'll join us in the next volume. In the meantime, we hope to see you at Hood's Woods. Take care and see you on the trail. Come on, guys. Come on. Let's go. Come on. Quick. Come on. Woo, 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 woo. Come on. Ah, woo, woo. Come on, let's go. Hey, hey. Woo, woo, woo. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Woo, 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 woo. Bye.